So, welcome everyone to my .NET ML. This is the fourth presentation. This is going to be the informal presentation. We are releasing this to be kind of an informal talk, something you can follow on with. It takes about 45 minutes to watch. It'll be absolutely everything that we have up to date with historic Hindustani Common Fencing. So yeah, this is the my .NET ML project. Means a field of action. We're trying to turn theory into practice, taking free open source and informed approaches to historic South Asian swordsmanship. We're using actual textual sources as well as living traditions and physical culture. I'm going to swear a lot during this presentation. If you don't like that, fuck you. So we'll quickly go through our goals. So our goal is to show that South Asian swordsmanship is more than just exhibitions. So the goals of HEMA.org are to decolonize the understanding of South Asian martial arts. So living traditions we found to match up with textual and historic evidence to some degree, but textual sources are often dismissed as not existing in the South Asian continent, especially from South Asians themselves. Y'all don't understand that India was a historic literate area. And the British didn't destroy everything. There's a lot of shit around. It's in libraries. You're just too lazy to look. You're too lazy to learn, to understand. We know that the gharanas, like the homes of Indian traditional music and those lineages, still exist. They still exist for South Asian swordsmanship. It's just no one's taken up the fucking buck, except a few groups like Sikhs and some Rajputs. Generally, it's not practiced. And we will understand how these South Asian weapons, like the talwar, like the kanda, like what environment did they grow from? We have all these modern ideas of like, oh, they were used like this, and people used to spin around and carry a 15-kilo sword. Bro, that's bullshit. Let's see how they actually were used in historic and social environments where they were forged. Let's not come up with myths. So this is the South Asian subcontinent mapped onto Asia, onto Europe, and you can see like how big it is. I mean, it's from like Portugal to Ukraine, and we've been able to find existence of a joint understanding of swordsmanship from what is essentially the Rome area on this map, all the way up to Denmark, and then across from the area above Portugal and Ireland to the Ukrainian area. We've found continuous swordsmanship, joint terminology. We have this information. So yeah, so more of our goals is like to demonstrate like specifically this wide understanding of Hindustani Common Fencing and a joint understanding of swordsmanship across the subcontinent, or at least the north of the subcontinent. And we want to understand the system of Hindustani Common Fencing, because a lot of the texts that we found are written to defeat common fencing. And what we mean by common fencing is like, how were people who were not nobles fighting with this? And so the texts we find have specific strategies that nobles used to fight that. And yeah, many Hindustani texts require Hindustani understanding swordsmanship to interpret. South Asian problems require South Asian solutions, and Hindustani, specifically the Hindustani language belt, that is a specific region that we're studying. So that's what we're going into, defining the Hindustani region. So in the north of the subcontinent, we've got this flat Indo-Gangetic plains. That's got a continuous language belt of Hindi and Urdu and related languages, things like Punjabi, Bhojpuri, Gujarati. Those aren't dialects, they're individual languages in themselves, but there's a spectrum and continuum in this area. And we see this overlapping with the Mughal Empire and the use of Hindustani as a Mughal lingua franca. And we say Hindustani, but we mean Urdu and Hindi and the mutual intelligible languages. A lot of the languages in the area in yellow on this map are mutually intelligible. They use a lot of the same terms, and so those terms feed into swordsmanship. So we took a look at texts, and this isn't actually a complete map. We have a lot more We also took a look at living traditions, and you can see in yellow the living traditions across the north of the subcontinent, and the textual sources are also there. You'll notice there's not many once you get past like Lucknow into like the Bihar and Bangladesh area. I mean, the British did take over that area first. It got looted first. It subsequently got destroyed after the Sepoy Rebellion. There's a lot of destruction of that area, and to understand it used to be very, very wealthy. It's not wealthy anymore. So, Bangladesh, that area that we call Bangladesh, used to be one of the biggest ports in the Mughal Empire. Now it's incredibly poor, and the Mughal Empire was 24% of the world's GDP. You can tell Bangladesh is not even like 4% anymore. So we'll give a brief timeline of the developments of the Hindustani region. So we've got up to 1200 AD is like the Vedic medieval period. There's not much textual evidence on that. It's mostly carvings and paintings and some oral traditions, but it's not something I've delved into. We do have people at the HEMA.org project. That's our website, hema.org, and there are people who are looking into that. So we have a Discord for that. You can join us via the website. And then 1200 to 1526 is the Delhi Sultanates. They start developing the Hindustani language, and then it's like concretely developed and used from the Mughal Empire, which is 1526 to 1750. And the Mughals are like the horse people, like Timuric, Islamic, Persian influenced horse people. They lead to the development of the Talwar and the Separ and Dal, and their influence is very apparent in like many parts of the subcontinent, many of the traditions, especially among like Sikhs and Rajputs. People don't like to say it, but like Hindi is very influenced by Persian as a language, and it's because of the Mughals, and the Mughal traditions and their culture becomes like a very integral part of Indian royal courts. So then 1750 to 1850-ish, 1857 we say, because that's when the Sepoy Rebellion happens. But within this period, we have the Gardi Court, which is the time of misfortune, and this is a warring states period. There's also Mughal successor states. This is mostly because the East India Company also fucked up shit, takes over Bengal in around 1750, and that absolutely destroys like the hold Mughal Empire had because you've destroyed their economy. And the British also take Bihar, and Bihar is like a big saltpeter region used to make gunpowder and shit, and so that also fucks with Mughal supply lines, and so everything starts falling apart. And so 1857 it culminates into the Sepoy Rebellion, which D.A. Kinsley, one of the big like British swordsmanship like HEMA writers, calls the last great sword war. And then 1858 to 1947 we have the British Empire, and this is a direct rule of the British Crown on the South Asian subcontinent. Before that it was the stock trading company, the capitalistic East India Company. Now it's just actually the like Indians are British subjects. And there's some autonomy granted to princely states, which is where we see living traditions continued. And those living traditions, they have a parallel in Indian classical music. There's a lot of Indian classical music living traditions also preserved by courts. The British military kind of it has weird rules where like officially people are supposed to like Indian troops are not supposed to use their own swordsmanship, and they're not really supposed to practice, but a lot of officers see that it's actually very advantageous to have troops practice their own native swordsmanship, and people practice in their youth via stick games. There's a defunding of like traditional schools in India that like teach swordsmanship, but the British military kind of absorbs some of those things to just like encourage soldiers to keep fencing because it's very useful on the battlefield. But then in 1947 to present day, we have the partitions of the Indian subcontinent, and this goes into like India and Pakistan and then later Bangladesh. And the partitions have a lot of violence and well-documented violence, but particularly the Punjab region has a lot of sword violence. It's a very flat plain, and when you cut across on religious lines to very well-integrated communities and provide economic incentive for them to do violence to each other, things get very, very bad very quickly, especially when some of those groups, actually many of those groups, not just Sikhs but Muslims too, have martial traditions. So we know that there's not just the Sikhs with their Gatka and Kanda and their sword traditions, those famous weapons traditions, but there's also the Chishti, Sufi weapons traditions that we don't really talk about anymore, and they're not really understood anymore, but those were a big part of Punjabi culture. And it's not just Sikh culture, but Punjabi culture too. Sikhs elevate it in their praise of the sword, but it's a very common thing within Punjab to carry a sword and to hold reverence for swords and swordsmanship. But yeah, that's the last time we get big sword violence and sword battles. It's a very touchy topic. It's not something we want to get into immediately. But 1947 is what we consider the end of our historic period of South Asian swordsmanship. So let's talk about interpreting swords and those materials without really a lens. And what I mean a lens is how do we interpret the material? If I give you a sword and you pick it up, how would you use that sword? What would it be informed by? Well, swords are informed by your social and economic activities. What I mean by that is if I were to give it to some guy in the UK, the UK's got this thing called roadmen. They're like little street gangsters. They don't really use swords. And if I were to give him a machete, that guy, I've seen videos of it, he puts a machete in his trousers and he pulls it out to threaten someone, but he doesn't really know how to use a machete. And you can see videos of British guys trying to fight with swords. They kind of just wave them and flail them randomly. But they're using machetes, I see swords, but they're just flailing it. But if we were to give this to someone in the Caribbean, where they use a machete every day, not for violence, but for cutting brush, for cutting sugarcane, for just day-to-day use, bro, they're going to use that thing very differently. They're going to have a well-versed hand at cutting. They're going to be very good at using that because they've practiced cutting all day. They have the biomechanics down. They have the neural pathways sorted. They're going to be very smooth in cutting. And so that's the social and economic activities affecting the interpretation of a material, the sword. And so this is why first principles don't work, because it's not just that the sword carries cultural baggage, it's not just the design of the sword. Machete is designed a certain way. That's different from a talwar, which has a specific type of hilt and a curve. It's also you as a person, you carry your own baggage, and as interpreters of material, we have our own baggage and cultural assumptions. And so if you have done HEMA or epi fencing or kendo, any Japanese martial arts, you're going to fight with a sword in a very different way. Even if I just give you a machete, it's got no hand guard. The way you'll fight with that is going to be different. If you're a kendo guy, it's going to be different if you're a epi fencer. That's just because that's what you've been trained in. You have that cultural baggage. And so that's why first principles don't work, and we need to look at other ways of interpreting this material. So here's the three ways we're going to be interpreting material: textual sources, physical culture, and living traditions. So let's talk about textual sources. So this includes paintings, and so we're looking at texts written by those living and experiencing periods of widespread swordsmanship, and these should be considered truthful in the writer's beliefs. They often lack detail and descriptions of common fencing. Again, what I mean by common fencing is what the everyday person within that time period is doing with a sword. But they do depict what wealthy individuals and nobles do and what their behaviors and mannerisms are, and so that's useful for understanding. We can find commonalities between texts, and that's what the goal of this project is. Again, we can find commonalities with living traditions too. So there's living traditions, and most of them now use stick games or exhibitions, not just because of British bans, but also they move into trying to legitimize these living traditions as sports. So we see that with the Gatka, the Sikh stick game, or Lati Gale, which is in the Bengal area. And they don't really take into consideration things like blade geometry or hilt design or the dangers of encounters. And what I mean by dangers is that when you're playing a stick game, you're not going to die you are your main goal is to get a point on the other person. You're trying to get a point. If you lose a point, that's fine. You just need to get 2 points. And so the way your mindset is going to be very different from someone who is like, I don't want to get cut. Bro, if I get cut, I'm going to lose an arm, or I'll get infected. I won't be able to go home and make love to my wife, or whatever the fuck you want to do. So you're very concerned about getting cut. So living traditions also carry myths that have been built up over time that aren't demonstratable, and you'll hear a lot of these myths from various Indian swordsmanship people, living traditions that haven't tested their mettle in battle for a very long time. And so to supplement that, we're actually looking at the textual sources, because those people actually went through battles, as opposed to, you know, some Ustad whose great granddad carried a 15-kilo sword. Very different things. And then let's look at physical culture. So physical culture training centers exist across the subcontinent, mostly as wrestling training centers, and these are akaras. So they use traditional training methods such as a gada or mace, and they do wrestling. And most of them are now focus exclusively on wrestling, and occasionally like swordsmanship exhibitions. But none of them are really focused on like actually doing swordsmanship for the sake of battle, because we don't live in that time period anymore. But we can still take some of the traditional training methods and understand how those were used to inform people's swordsmanship and like to train swordsmanship. So this is the sword and the shield. So the sword we are going to be talking about in Hindustani Common Fencing is the talwar. The talwar is a curved sword with a what's called a disc pommel hilt in English. So you can see the hilt has a flat disc on the bottom, and it sometimes does a knuckle guard, sometimes doesn't. But that flat disc is one of the defining features of a talwar hilt. It limits wrist mobility depending on the width of the disc. In most talwars we'll be talking about, they do have a wide disc that does limit that wrist mobility. They're also quite tight and compress the knuckles. By that I mean you can't hold it in like what HEMA calls like a handshake grip, and you can't hold it very loosely. It does have to be a hammer grip. Yeah, and again, to go back, we do have a curved blade, and so like, you know, the curved blade, it changes the dynamics over a straight blade, where you are cutting is going to be, you know, a fraction of a second later to actually hit with the curve. And so things like the percussive edge and where you're pulling the blade through is going to be slightly different. Let's talk about the limitations of the talwar. So again, yeah, that curve, it reduces the distance of swordplay. You can't be at such a far distance because you have that curve. It's more difficult to do things like thrust as easily or get those cuts with just the tip. And then, yeah, the tight hilt and disc pommel, that prevents lack of wrist extension, which British sources call the false wrist play. It favors a drawing cut, so that's cutting and pulling all the way through the target. And the drawing cut, it favors a change in chambered position. So to understand the difference between this and other types of swordsmanship, you'll see other types of swordsmanship will hold the sword out and they'll do a cut and then bring it back to like a center position. Indian swordsmanship has chambered position, so maybe under the armpit, over the shoulder on either side, or by the hip. And so when you're cutting, you're like pulling from your hip area to over your shoulder, or you're pulling from one side of your shoulder to the other, and that changes the arc of the blade, but also how much force you're able to put into the blade. And this is because the sword is also, in historic texts and accounts, common for cavalry use also. It's a good all-rounder sword. And the British and French copy this sword design in their sabres for, their horse-mounted units. And then we'll talk about the shield, or the secondary weapon, which is used for parrying. And this is optimal, and it's seen in combination in lots and lots of paintings. You often see a talwar and a dal, a shield, together. A dal is the smaller shield, a separ is I guess, a Persian term for a larger shield, but dal is a more like native term to Hindustani. So yeah, the dal becomes like common during the Mughal period. It's often made of rhino hide or metal or even turtle shell. There's like 2 to 3 straps depending on the size, but we're going to be talking about the 2-strap one held in the hand. The 2-strap smaller buckler, so they actually decrease in size over time. They become more common as firearms become more common because you can hold a gun in and hold the rifle in your hand if you have the smaller shield. And you can see the 2 straps there in the photo, in the painting, and yeah, you hold it with your hands like that rather than strapping it to your entire arm. And soldiers are referred to as sipagar or sipadar, which later morphs into like sipahi, and that literally means shield holder. And this morphs into sepoy, what the British call sepoys. So that's how important the shield is. Like, soldiers are not called swordsmen, although we do have some dictionary definitions that call them like dalwar gar. Actually, the term that the British use is sepoy, shield holders. So how common was swordsmanship within the region of the Hindustan, the north of the subcontinent? Well, military labour markets extend across the subcontinent and even across the sea into Africa. We see lots of Africans throughout Indian history, not just Malik Umber, but like in the backgrounds of many Deccani paintings. There were huge amounts of weaponry available. And even into present day, you can buy a lot of antique talwars for relatively low prices, especially if you consider the cost of like Japanese or European swords. Super low prices to buy Indian swords. There's a bit of a bubble now because of the Sikh diaspora being really into swords again. But that happens every so often. There's also huge amounts of political upheaval on a regular basis with new areas to conquer. So we saw on that map, Akbar conquered up to the Deccan, and then Aurangzeb continued to conquer further. But there's also like constant uprisings to put down rebellions and stuff. And there's also roving horseback bandit societies called the Pindaris, and they're able to easily flee into hills and mountains and dry plains. The Marathas actually use this tactic, and so do the Sikhs, where they retreat to the Shivalik hills. But these are constant like things to be aware of, that your like village might be attacked at any point. And because your village might be attacked at any point, both Hindu and Muslim educational institutes taught swordsmanship and dagger play and shield play. And from the evidence we have, it seems that there wasn't really a significant difference between Hindu and Muslim educational institutes teaching this stuff. I mean, if you're in a village and your village has both got Hindus and Muslims, and you guys have to go on night watch to make sure bandits don't raid your town, you don't really give a shit if your neighbor is a Muslim or Hindu, as long as he can pick up a sword and fight next to you. And yeah, despite the early adoption and improvements in firearms that happened across the Mughal Empire, like the development of combined arms tactics and the toreador, which there's lots of academic sources about, swordsmanship remains like a vital part of Indic culture and Persianate tradition. It's a big part of field equipment, but also a part of like honor and honor culture. And European infantry and native like cavalry tactics become vital during like the Garbika Waqt, and those use the talwar a lot. You'll see this in like Maratha paintings, James Skinner paintings. And so there's a source there. We have more sources. You reach out to us by Discord. Why the climate swordsmanship? TLDR, British rule, the British takeover. There's a prolonged period of peace, and there's no longer like that many rebellions happening within the British Empire. Within the British India. The ones that are happening are put down with guns rather than swords, and that's because military technology has moved on. But when you have that period of peace, people aren't fighting as much, and therefore they're not concerned about like, my village is going to get raided by bandits, because the British are essentially policing things, and the state is now policing things under the like Pakistani or Indian governments. They make sure that your village is not raided by bandits at night. And in making sure that your village is not raided by bandits at night, you don't need to keep a sword. Therefore, you don't need to keep up your swordsmanship. There are educational reforms that the British government make. So in 1858, the British education system is kind of implemented into India. There's a lot of schools that open up, and the funding system basically pumps tons of money into that. So it encourages people away from the traditional like Gurkha or Akara system, and even the madrasas, and it promises equal citizenship and opportunities within the empire. My family, for example, moved abroad because they had access to equal opportunities and citizenship to other members or secondary citizens of the British Empire. And so, yeah, there's just like less involvement within those traditional school systems. And then communities that have a big cultural and religious emphasis on swords will maintain these traditions. As I mentioned, swords are a big part of Sikh theology, and they are a mandatory part of the initiate articles for Amritdhari. So those who take certain vows within the Sikh community will carry their kirpan, their sword. And then modern life and demands have made the skill set optional. If you work in IT, you don't need a sword on the day-to-day. And you don't need to join the military labor market because it really is better opportunities and better paying opportunities that are safer for you. So you'll probably take up, a job in tech support or a job in data management or any of those other things. And so where we see that these traditions and skills maintained is in rural areas, and it's kind of considered a country bumpkin thing. But also I've seen in rural areas, when you take the motorway, or it used to be the case that you took the motorway in India, and if you went down like some back roads and through some villages, if you stopped at any point, if you were with a driver, the driver would often carry a very, very large knife or a sword with him. The concern was that you might get robbed. And so, the rule of law doesn't extend all the way into rural India sometimes. And so, stay strapped, homie. So we're going to textual evidence. And I'm trying to keep this under 45 minutes, so let's go. Textual sources and literature traditions, as I said, we've got a lot of textual sources. They are from across the subcontinent. And we will do a comparison of these two. So this is the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture on the left, and this is one of their diagrams there. This is from the 1930s. This is from Baroda state, from the Gharana that is a lineage from essentially the Marathas, but it settles into Gujarat. And on the right-hand side is the Mifta-e Sipagari. And so this is from Rampur, and it's written by someone local from Jaunpur. And that's essentially the Awadh area. So we have two very vastly different regions that speak essentially different dialects of Hindustani. And the reason I say dialects of Hindustani is because on the left, that diagram, the annotations are actually in Hindustani as well. And they are the same words that we see as one on the right there. So cut to the head from the right to the left is called a tamacha, meaning slap. On the left to the right is beheda, meaning outside. To the head is sir, and those exist on both of these images. Actually, the images match up almost perfectly, but as you can see on the right hand side, there's many, many more terms used. So we map this. We map this against between these two documents here, but also against all the other historic texts we have. So yeah, common terminology across texts. How can she slap? Because we see that the terms are the matcha, a slap, and the terms are very not flowery or poetic, but straightforward. These are target areas to cut, but the target areas often dictate what kind of movement is used. So you can see in the Encyclopedia of Physical Culture there, the first column, the second column is Shastra Vidya Nama, which is a Punjabi text, and then there's Mifta-e Sipagari, and then there's I can't remember the name. It's on our website. It's a treatise on Indian swordsmanship from the National Museum in Delhi, and then we have the Nahangnama, which is also from the National Museum in Delhi. You can see over time we're moving chronologically, so 1930s is on the left-hand side, and then we go to the 1550s on the right-hand side. And as we move back further through time, there's fewer and fewer common terms overlapping. That's because Hindustani is maybe not percolating into the text at this point. It's only when we get to around like 1812 that like Hindustani, like Urdu, we know, for example, is definitely a thing within the courts of Ranjit Singh in Punjab, but also in Awadh and Lucknow. And so that's where we get like definite use of those terms. If we'll talk about like the terms and what they look like, and we'll post this image onto our website, but it's super clear that these terms are like straight to the point. When we say that we're going to do beheader, there's a specific cut coming left to right. You're targeting a specific side of the head. And when we talk about other types of swordsmanship, for example, Chinese swordsmanship, you might hear, or Japanese swordsmanship, like you hear, like for example, in judo, you have like big outer wheel, little outer wheel, and those make sense if you speak Japanese, but they're also a bit like, they sound a bit poetic. Whereas like these, like we have a cut there, moda, literally meaning shoulder, and it is a strike to the shoulder. There's not too many poetic terms, and when they are poetic, they're like very like cultural. So we have Janoi, which is like the sacred thread that like many upper caste Hindus are, and so that is a diagonal cut from shoulder to waist, and you can see like in your head, it's a red sacred thread they wear from their shoulder to their waist. That is where the cut goes. We have another one which is like fundak, which is a type of henna that comes from the Arabic areas and is common in India, and it's henna across the fingertips, and so that's a strike to the fingertips, and that's in Miftai Sipagari. And so these are very like cultural or regional terms, but most of them are just like normal like body part terms that we can understand today within modern Hindustani. Kamar meaning waist, strike to the waist. So we recreated some of these plays from the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture because it is such a good text to understand like physical culture from a specific lineage, but also swordsmanship from a specific lineage. The text is super clear that it is to train swordsmanship. It uses sticks to train swordsmanship. They've even designed the actual training implements to mimic the war in its shape. And so we'll show you the images here along with, you know, us actually practicing the swordsmanship from the text.
Kumar, Shir, Sir, Ani. Nice. That's the video.
And now we'll look at the corresponding living traditions. So we've got the Hazara living tradition and the Arya Vedal.
तमाचा नीचे से कमर ये चीर और ये सिर देखिए.
So that was Tamacha, Kamar, Chir and Sir. So that's the same as what we have in the manuscripts dating from 1812.
तमाचा कमर चीर सिर चीर.
So we'll fast forward. This is the Hazara Gurkha from northwest Pakistan, the Abbottabad area.
303.
So he's saying Tamacha, Behera, Sir, which is again the same as we have in the 1812 manuscript from Rampur. And so again, Tamacha, slap, Behera, backhand cut, and Sir to the head. Let's talk about physical culture. So physical culture is another lens to look at this. We've talked about like texts. We've definitely got like some photos of what like the movements look like, but things like cutting mechanics are difficult to understand without actually, seeing it in person. But also it's difficult to understand like what were people doing to supplement their swordsmanship. People weren't just doing swordsmanship, they were doing other forms of strength training. And so does that inform how they use the sword? Let's look into that. So you can see here this is a painting from that's in the V&A. I believe it's from a British album. You can find it on the V&A website. On the right hand side is someone using a pata, which is the gauntlet sword. And you can see below there is a bunch of training implements. There's a bana. There's two types of bana. There's one which is the large staff with balls at the end. One which has two balls, which is kind of like a long sword. And then you'll see some practice dal and droit. So they actually have examples of this practice dal and droit within the Royal Armouries, preserved. They actually have like a leather case on them stuff. And so you can see that the soldiers in the red coats, these are British Indian soldiers, watching and seeing people practice swordsmanship. And on the other side, on the left hand side, you've got people wrestling. So it shows how interconnected swordsmanship and wrestling were. And not only are they wrestling, you'll see in the back, they're practicing with mudgers or like meals or jori. And that's clearly an important part of their strength training for not just wrestling, but also swordsmanship. So let's reappraise the physical cultural lens. So a lot of the focus within current Indian lineages is on the exhibitionary Marhati or Banati movements, which is like sword or staff spinning. You also see this for like talwaras, which is like people spin these staffs and swords. It's also called talwar buzzi, and like sword spinning is highly exhibitionary. It demonstrates good weapons handling. And it's really impressive to watch, and it's good for gatherings and displays, which they have very large gatherings and displays in India. But and you see this not at just like the Kumbh Mela, but also Muharram and various other religious traditions and Nagar Kirtans. But it seems to be just like for exhibitions rather than everyday training. Does it improve your swordsmanship? It improves your sword's handling, but does it improve your tactics and how you engage with the opponent? I don't think so. I will say that there's some applications of sword dances and like multi-directional flaring, when you flare the sword in each direction and try and essentially keep people away. And there's a practical purpose in this, in that India and Pakistan today, there's still like mob riots. And so mob riots are where essentially the mob will decide on mob justice and attack one person. And so if you are being unduly attacked, it is a very good idea to flare your sword and keep them away. People do not want to get cut and will stay far away of a man flaring his sword. And this is applicable to, pre-modern South Asia, where we saw the Bindari, who acted as looters. And so like they would, in groups, attack smaller groups or individuals on the battlefield. They were often accompanied various, not just Mughal, but Maratha and Sikh groups. They would join into the battlefield and attack. And if you want to keep them away and you're only like one guy, it's best to flare your sword until they lose interest. They're going for the easiest target to try and loot. So to oppose this like sword spinning and dancing, we're going to look at physical culture in terms of wrestling. We think this is the best lens. Wrestling is the best model and lens for Hindustani swordsmanship because of the historic ubiquity of Akhada or Rastam Khani or Gurkul. Physical culture and educational training centers used to be one, and they used to teach swordplay and reading and writing and wrestling in tandem. And wrestling akaras still exist across South Asia, especially in the north. And wrestling's prominence not just within the Mahabharata, but also within Persianate tradition, like the Shahnameh. Also within like textual evidence of the Deccan courts and how important Persian wrestling was within the Deccan courts and how it was sponsored by various royals. But we also see this in later texts in like the 1930s when the Baroda courts write their Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture. They actually published something just before that. They published a different book called Scientific Wrestling, which is about Indian wrestling, and it breaks down everything. And that can be found on our website, hsama.org. But it breaks down the system of Indian wrestling according to the Baroda courts and talks about how they funded various wrestlers. Now, within the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture, they talk about how they didn't just fund wrestlers; they also funded gadka players and various swordsmen, and they also funded, people like Vajra Mushti Jettis, these Brahmin caste fighters who would have these big spiky knuckle dusters. And so these are all fighting arts trained together within courts, and they're all training within the same physical culture. And so you can see part of that physical culture. You see the great Gama, the line of Punjab on the right there, and he's carrying a gada. And the gada is a mace, a traditional mace carried by Lord Hanuman, and it's also a physical culture training tool within the Akhada. And if you look at some much smarter people than myself, Dr. Kamal Singh, who wrote in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Sikh Studies, in the chapter on Sikh martial arts, he says that in the Nihang Sikh tradition, swordplay is often first taught as Garda Vidya, literally mace knowledge. So let's look at the Akhada. So what they do in the Akhada is they do exercises for hundreds of repetitions a day. And they still teach wrestling, and so they'll teach a lot of dans, betaks, squats and push-ups, and they'll do hundreds of repetitions of that. But they'll also do hundreds of repetitions of mace exercises, and so these are using either the meal, which is a Persian instrument. It requires a small step to shift it, and this comes from the Persian tradition. Recommend looking at Razmafsa or Bayat al-Assad for those guys. Bayat al-Assad has done a really good interpretation of Persian swordsmanship using the meal. They also, within the Akhada, use a jori, which is more of an Indian type of meal. It requires you to keep it close to your neck and shift the shoulders, but the feet stay in place. And then probably most unique to India is the gada, and the gada is it's uniquely Indian because it uses either one or two hands. It requires a strong pull over the shoulder, and it can be used for both an inward and outward swing. Now it's used in wrestling because it's really good at teaching shoulder throws. It's the same weight distribution, but if they're performing hundreds of repetitions of this a day, and we have textual evidence that they were doing this during periods of swordsmanship in Akhadas, then they must have thought it contributed somehow to the use of not just wrestling, but like physical culture development and weapons development. Now, if you're doing something for hundreds of repetitions a day, 1,000 repetitions a day, if I give you a gada and you do it, and then I give you a stick and I tell you to swing the stick, it's highly likely, because of the ingrained neuromuscular pathway, that you will use that stick like use a gada. And so we see that there are two types of pulls, two types of swings within the use of Indian meals and maces. And so this is the inward swing, shown on the left-hand side, and the outward swing, shown on the right-hand side. And so these correspond very nicely to the use of swords. I'll show you here. So the talwar versus the mace, you can see that in the video we're about to show you that the disc helps you pull down more strongly the sword onto the opponent. So if you're doing a vertical strike, you can pull the disc through the opponent rather than just pulling the sword down. You pull your whole hand and arm. It engages the lats, pulls in the entire body through the opponent. And you can see that the inward swing will mimic attacks from the right hand chamber position, the sword side to shoulder, and the outward swing shows a change in chamber position, and you can see this in the video. So this is a comparison of the two swings. So this is the first inward swing. So a single arm swing, and this would be used for the tamacha or seir cut. There it is again. And you can see it loads the shoulder and the entire body. Now this works well with the dal or shield because obviously you're kind of exposed as you're cutting like that. And this is the use of the two-handed cutter, swinging behind the head, switching between chambered positions. And so if I were to do a beheader cut from one shoulder to the other, I would have to do this with the sword. And so we can see the comparison with the sword. Let the weight of the sword drop on the head and swing around. Gain some speed with the sword that you can't do with the heavy gada, which the gada does have weight at the end of the tip, which allows you to gain some extra strength and therefore translate that into speed. Speed, strength continuum in sports science principles. Let's talk about living tradition. So we have some documented living traditions of Hindustani fencing. We've been able to track some of the lineages, but we're still looking into some of them. So we've got Sikh Gadka, we've got Hazara Gadka, we've got various unnamed Thalwarbazi, which you see at Muharram, and there's Muharram Akhara, and we actually see some very skilled use of like sword and lati, and you can see this from Lucknow to Kolkata. I think also Lahore may have some of these traditions too, but it's really difficult to get some of those videos out. If you have videos, please send them over. Again, join our Discord at hsama.org. We also have the Nath Sadhu traditions, which arguably are the traditions within the Lucknow area come out of, and this is traceable to the 1300s. We have the Bundi Akhara in within the Bundi, the Rajput region, and this is a Rajput Akhara that still teaches swordsmanship. Aleski Kurichin of IndianFight.com, he's trained here and he's documented this quite well, so you can check that out. There's also the Arya Virdal, who they started in Haryana, like the Dal, the military wing, but there's good evidence that they are related in lineage to the Baroda courts. So there's lots of different living traditions still within India. Again, our criticisms that they use a stick or they're exhibitionary or they haven't fought in battles for a long time, they are all valid criticisms to a degree. These are also traditions in their own right that shouldn't be dismissed just because they're not fighting with steel, or they're not going resisted or 100% fighting with padded armor and steel on like HEMA. They're still valid, and they're still valid approaches to swordsmanship. How historic they are, well, we can never know, because unless it's written down, we don't actually know. But we can use these traditions to begin to understand various styles of swordsmanship, and also the swordsmanship texts and how people would have thought about things. So let's talk about the commonalities within living traditions. So they all use a similar greeting in what we're calling Hindustani Common Fencing. This is this group of living traditions and texts, and they all use a salami, like a greeting. This is similar to a waikru. They demonstrate before fighting the core footwork, which is Bentadar, which actually they all use very similar terms. Bentadar, Pavitadar, Pawn. They all demonstrate this like run around the ring or the fighting area before they decide to fight. They have similar modes of gameplay, and we'll talk about those modes of gameplay. They use the same weaponry, so they either use stick and buckler, single stick, or lathi. They have the same exhibitionary weaponry, but also like things like the banetti and stuff. They have the same stances, which is like weapon foot forward. They have the same cutting across two chambered positions, the same paddling between sword and shield. So the sword goes out and the shield goes out, and that's a paddling motion. There's also the same striking terminology used within the living traditions as used in the historic texts. Let's talk about the four modes of gameplay. So there's four modes of gameplay. One is competitive to submission. So in textual sources, this is called jut fighting, which is a bit problematic, but essentially it's a rural stick fight for honor for Izzat. Within living traditions, we know that lots of Sikh families will tell you about like an oral history of their granddad's uncle got into a fight and with a stick, and then he smacked the other guy in the face, and the other guy was dishonored, and after that there was like some falling out. We also have like a second type of gameplay, which is a competitive sport, as we now know it for points. So this is actually quite common in Punjab. K.S. Akali is actually the modern Gurkha rule set book from the 1930s. It's been updated since by modern Gurkha organizations, but it's a sport. It's quite a modern sport. And we also have Hazara and Muharram competitions of Gurkha. They have slightly different rules, usually until first strike. We also have a third type of gameplay, which is paired forms. This is between rival Akara at Muharram. I often see this in videos from Bengal. You can lose by essentially going off beat. So there is a beat, you guys copy the same movements, and if you go off beat, you get hit and you get fucked. You lose. And the textual sources we see for this are actually quite a recent study done by UNESCO on martial arts and South Asian martial arts in Bengal. And it's about Lati Gale, and it's a very good explanation of this. It's pretty modern work, but the guys documented these rural traditions. And the living traditions of Muharram Jaluz, the videos often use this rule set. And then the fourth type is exhibitions of entertainment. So this is the sword dancing that we see. So modern Gurkha rule sets have a separate category for Rasmi. A category that invokes ras, like feelings or like flavors of. It's hard to describe ras in English, but it evokes a feeling, it evokes a flavor, and that's what this category is. It's to inspire, and the living traditions are evident in Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim Jalus. So in Nagar Kirtans, Muharram, Kumbh Mela, all of these things. So about footwork. So footwork is common across Hindustani Common Fencing, at least the most basic type of footwork. So the common footwork is passing footwork, stepping forward and back. This isn't really described in text too much, because why do you need to describe walking to someone who knows how to walk? Within HEMA sources, like historic European martial arts sources, arguably the only time that footwork's really explained is like when they're writing for people that they assume are idiots and don't know how to do anything. Things like Roworth and stuff. But like you don't need to explain to people how to walk back and forth. And these texts as well, like these Indian texts that we're talking about, historic South Asian texts, they are an addition, an accompaniment to you training within a school. It's not for you to learn from the book. It's for you to train at a school and learn some other tactics. Saying that, the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture was specifically written to preserve what they saw as like a dying art and swordsmanship, and basically all Indian games that they were afraid would die out, and they wanted to share that knowledge with everyone. So that's the only one that really describes like footwork. But we do see this footwork within living traditions, and so this is not just forward and backward walking, but lateral and diagonal steps to get the body offline and to gain an angle of advantage, and also to power off the next cut. This is called Bendera, and it's described in case of Kali's Gutka fighting, but also Bhusha awards points for it, and the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture, and it's often initiated during a parry with a buckler or stick. And I've drawn these images here. They are hard to understand. Let's watch the video. So here we're going to see the 4-step footwork, the standard Bendera, covered in a couple of different sources. So they start on the 1 and the 4 of this square and move their foot across. Yeah, bro, that's loud. So yeah, I've tried to fast forward this, but it's pretty simple. They're stepping in the square, stepping across, and replace, across and replace. So there's hands associated with it, so showing there's always a lead hand with the lead foot. And we can see then the circling footwork. So let's go back. So the circling footwork, this is shown in the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture and seen across living traditions. It's similar to the 4-step that we just saw. The feet cross during defensive actions, and the strikes are timed with the back foot. So you step across on the defensive action, and you have your feet essentially crossed during that period. And then as the back foot follows up, the entire body shifts and turns with the cut. So you cut as you turn and straighten up again. And so here, watch the guy in. Yeah, watch striking while circling Bendera. So watch guy in orange. He's got best footwork.
ਖੱਬੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਘੁੰਮਣਾ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਅਭਿਆਸ
He's pretending as he's
ਸਾਡੇ ਦਿਮਾਗ ਦੇ ਦਿਲ ਤੱਕ ਉਤਰ ਜਾਵੇ।
Cross defend, and strike as the other foot falls behind. So that extra, as the foot follows, after they've crossed feet and he squares the stance again, that's when the second strike comes in. And then we have the staggered Bendera. So this is a step across and forward. This is, I've used a competition example. And that's awarded 3 points. So you can see the feet cross in slow motion. There's from a different angle. Terrible angles in these videos. But yeah, you can see the feet cross here. So he stepped outward, and then here he's out step across. That was a step across very fast. And he's able to get an advantageous angle on his opponent. So that's the staggered Bendera. Again, all of these are very common in various traditions. These are the best example videos I could give. Now we'll talk about cutting. So we'll compare cutting because how we cut is not just in terms of like how the gada might be used to inform our cuts, but the mechanics of cutting. Do we try and cut straight through an object, or do we cut and retreat? Or do we chop into the object and then pull the blade through? These are different ways of understanding cutting, and so I've in hope in future we can make a video testing this on clay, which is the traditional training material like that you would cut on. But let's just take a look at cutting and how this works in the different traditions and some of my analysis on it, because I have some criticisms of some of the modern traditions, which I feel that because they haven't tried to cut things in a very long time, they have moved away from that, or they've sportified in some cases. This is looking at the cutting mechanics in different living traditions. So we'll start with a look at the aviador, which uses circular cuts. They actually use a sword and shield here, so maybe a good approximation of what these cuts may look like. So they essentially move in an arc. The sword hand moves in an arc.
तमाचा नीचे से
See, there's the arc.
कमर, ये चीर और ये सिर.
And
देखिए
so from the machete hammer there,
कमर,
it's a big arc.
सिर, तमाचा.
And so we've got other types, which is like, all cuts are linear. So there's like a tap and retreat. And we see this in Sikaka. I have some criticisms. Let's see.
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਟੈਕ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਨੇ ਹਨ?
So see, there's not really like one, he's not holding hammer grip, and two, there's like a strike and comes back to a more central guarded position rather than cutting all the way through. Instead of moving from chambered position to chambered position of each shoulder under the armpits. They keep you at this for quite a while. I'm going to fast forward. So here is maybe some criticism I have looking at historic images of grips, and this might be like a regional ethnic difference, but I actually think this is a sporting adaptation, allowing Gutko players to get greater reach. And so look at how the Gutko organization, World Gutko organization, recommends you hold the training implement. The hand goes in, and the thumb goes along the top. This is different from the hammer grip we see in the Thor. You can't really do that with the thumb of the Thor. And if you'd watched the videos, of them playing, you see he has quite a loose grip and allows him to extend the Thor a lot further forward. This is a historic image instead from, I believe, it's at the V&A, and I believe it's either the late 1700s or early 1800s, and this is Muharram, and again, these Muslims having a jalous, but they are doing swordsmanship with the same implements. We see the exact same implements. They're pressing with these wooden sticks, and they hold it in hammer grip. They don't have the thumb on the back, and so yeah, this may you can see like right there. And so the Gutko thing may be a sporting adaptation just to get that little bit of extra reach and therefore points. So we might have to disregard how they use that in translating to swordsmanship. And then we have another type. So instead of a circular arc or going straight to the target and coming back, there is a third way that we've seen cut, and it's it's a cut at an angle, taking advantage of the curve of the blade, but here they use a stick, and it's a pull away from the target. So you cut towards the target and then pull away. So it's a chop and pull motion. So he's about to teach him here, you're doing the strike wrong. He says, don't do that. Straightforward. Just don't do it straightforward. Because you can get struck back. Instead, hold it out at an angle. And so that covers your center line. So here's him showing the younger student that his center line is covered. See, when he tries to strike him back. Center line's not covered there. So if we cover the center line, then when we do a strike, we're instead having to cut an angle and pull away, chop and pull. Says, do it like I showed you.
ये त्रिबारा उस्ताद जी इब्राहिम को सिखा रहे हैं कि उसमें जो एग्जैक्टली कैसे वार करना है
and see how it blocks.
यानी न सिर्फ ये कि वार करना है बल्कि साथ ही दिफा भी करना है. ये पहला वार है.
And you're going to get struck. You're not covering your center line. This is actually like a useful tactical thing. It's also a useful way of looking at cutting. Instead of circular, you may be blocked and counterattacked against. And so that's a very interesting way to look at the same cutting mechanics. So, coming up to our conclusion. So yeah, we want to recreate the plays from the Indian Encyclopedia of Physical Culture, mess with the timing, start doing free play, building sparring laws that are HEMA acceptable, so we can start, adding some power and resistance and essentially recreating actual battles and duels. We're going to read these other texts that we have access to, try to implement those and apply those techniques. With things like Mifta Isipagali, we have like an entire play and sequence we can go through. If you are from a living tradition, please reach out to us. You can reach out to us at hsama.org, leave a comment under our YouTube, or you can go to our Instagram, that's hsama, HASAMA_ORG. Reach out to us there. If you're from a Nahang group, pretty secretive, we'd love to hear from you. If you're from the Arya Veerdal, you guys are also pretty secretive, we would love to hear from you. Or if you're from one of these isolated regions in like Pakistan, like in Kashmir, and you do like Hazara Gadka, reach out to us. We would love to understand all of the different traditions within the subcontinent. It may not be the specific text we're looking at, like it might be very different from Awadi fencing, but it would inform a general understanding of the subcontinent. So we have to move forward, start recreating more of these plays, start putting them into practice, start getting people sparring against each other. That'd be really dope. And we have a study group via our Discord, and so the study group will go on to essentially create smaller study groups regionally across the various parts of the world. So if you want to get involved, come join us. So thank you as always for your time. This is a presentation by Dan A. Amul. We are part of the hsama.org project. You can go to hsama.org to find out more and join our Discord. We're aiming to create free, open source and informed information about South Asian swordsmanship and historic martial arts.